Hi, this is SHAMBHAVI. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The SATSANG with SHAMBHAVI podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jayakula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are.
I have a question that has come out of the last couple of days, and your encouragement of us to engage with the teachings in a less rote way. I've been thinking about the ways that my practice is rote, and thinking about creativity in practice, but then also about how practice is a destructive process.
Well, there's creativity that just emerges because you're listening so deeply to the practice that it just becomes apparent that you could go in a certain direction as an expression of your engagement and understanding of what's happening. If anything's ever happened to me in practice where I went off script, it was because it just became apparent that that's where it was going. It wasn't that I decided, oh, this might be fun, or that might be good, or something like that. Or I don't like it this way, so I'll just do it a different way. Or some other teacher last week told me a different way to do this, so I'm just going to mush the two things together and see what happens. Any instruction for a practice that's given, and any practice of a practice, needs to be informed by actual knowledge, like actual understanding of what's happening. And so when you're doing a practice, if there's a space for improvisation, then it'll just arise, and you don't have to worry about it. If you have some rationale for it and you thought about it and you were kind of like, well, this might be good or that might be good, then don't do that. That's not based on anything. The other thing is that there's more minor variations in practice that are just a way of experiencing it a little differently, like how loudly you practice, or how slowly, or how quickly, or in some cases how you're sitting, or what you're doing with your hands, or what's in the room, or what offerings you're making. Even though we don't want to just change practices when our changes are not based in understanding of the practice, but that doesn't mean there can't be a lot of variation within the form that we've been given. So you might want to think about that. And then, of course, engagement is really when we're really listening and paying attention to what's happening. We're really feeling what's going on. We're feeling like we're in that conversation with a friend, right?
Yeah.
And so when we lose contact with that, things can get very exciting because maybe we're just fantasizing about something. Or things can get very rote. You know, we can be going, I didn't fold the laundry. Or we're just like zoned out or something. And then it just gets very boring. If we're not actually engaging with the energy of it, or the intelligence of it, or the sensation of it, or the beauty of it, or something, then it's going to get rote. Another thing that makes our practice rote is when we're practicing to a tight schedule. We have some things we think we should be doing, or the teacher said do these practices, and then every single day we're practicing for the same amount of time, and we're timing our practice. What does that mean? You know, I'm going to do mantra for 20 minutes, and then I'm going to do Kriya Yoga for 15 minutes, and then it means that we just miss all these opportunities to go deeper, or let it become something other than just filling up 15 minutes or 20 minutes or half an hour. If we don't have any kind of open-endedness in our practice, that really cuts down on our enjoyment of it too. Sort of just doing a checklist. And a lot of opportunities that arise in sadhana are when we enter into that kind of open landscape where we've sort of forgotten about time and numbers of things. That's where the adventure is. It's not that you won't get fruit from your practice, even if it feels rote. It's just going to be much slower, and it's not going to feel as good. So I would say if you're in a position where you're just doing the same exact amount of time every day, and you're on a schedule, and You have everything portioned out within the practice, to the minute, only do one thing. I mean, if you're doing that, the minimum that I ask from committed students is an hour a day. And that seems like a lot for people that are very busy. That's a big commitment. But what can you really legitimately do in an hour and still have that sense of spaciousness? You really can only do one thing. Maybe two things, like do a little asana beforehand and then sit down. You can't do much in an hour that is going to allow you to travel around and feel like you're entering into something for reals if you're doing a whole bunch of different things. Did you ever read that Chogyam Trungpa poem, Buddhist Disneyland? It's very, very funny and impossible to recount, but it's about all the things students say to not have to sit. He said, I'll build you a Buddhist Disneyland if I don't have to sit for 45 minutes. That's like one of the lines in it.
What was your relationship to Chogyam?
Nothing. I just read his books and watched movies of him teaching and videos. I never met him or ever wanted to know him. I read some stuff about his relationships to his students and how he conducted that community, how he orchestrated the community, and I was just like, I don't have the energy for that. Non-stop, 24/7 drinking and orgying and I don't know. That was just not me. And then all that stuff came out about him, but before that, I thought he was pretty great. But I also knew that he just wasn't the right teacher for me. He orchestrated all these war games and formal dressage, horse riding, and he was super into Northern European culture, and particularly British upper crusty culture. I mean, the whole thing, this is a perfect example of when you like some teachings, but the flavor that they're delivering is totally not your thing. That's how I felt about it. There's a lot of messiness in human life, a lot of mixed upness and incompleteness. And the thing is, I know from some personal experience and also just hearing other people's experiences that one of the ways that teachers get students to stay in abusive situations is by telling you that you can't get what they have to offer anywhere else. So as long as you know that's not true and is never true, and no teacher should ever say that or try to manipulate you that way. As long as you know that that's not true, if you want to learn from someone in some messy condition, you can do that and not get snared, not get too damaged. You don't have to do it, but you always want to be able to walk away. You don't want to feel like, if I leave, I'll never have this again. That's what they try to tell you.
Why is that never true?
Because there's infinite spiritual opportunity. You receive opportunity based on your sincerity in part. And then there's always the wild card of grace, but basically any sincere student who's asking for help from this alive, aware reality is going to get it, period. It's just a fact. You never, ever left without help.
I know there's like so many different ways to get help. Would you specifically be able to have access to a teacher?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. But I do know that this is the main thing that's being played out here, this process of waking up. And when we are very sincere, we get help to do that. Ma put it this way. She said, if you could practice for 12 hours a day, if you could do 12 hours a day of sadhana, you would not be asked to do anything else. She didn't mean I wouldn't ask you to do anything else. She just meant the universe would not ask you to do anything else. When I left academia, I made a vow, sort of. I just set the intention to not ever ask for work, and just to see what happened. And I always had work. From the minute I did that, I had people asking me to do work for them, and it was extremely highly paid work, and I only had to work 10 hours a week, and the rest of the time I did sadhana, and it was just provided for. We're all being provided for, in whatever way, in infinite, uncountable, unknowable ways. And also we don't exist, so the whole thing is just an expressive playing field, right? A field of rasa, of expression. But when we're doing practice and we're being sincere, we get a special kind of help. I had some teachers early on, and I prayed for many, many, many years for a teacher in this tradition. And then I met someone, and then I studied with that person for a number of years, and he turned out to not be so savory. And then I broke up with that teacher, and I thought, I'm never going to find another teacher. And immediately from the moment I broke up, all these teachers came in my life, and Ma came in my life. And again, I'm not saying this is like a paradigm of what will happen to everybody, but it's one version of that.
Kind of analogous to how sometimes we can be in a relationship with a romantic partner and not be leaving. We feel like we'll never find another person.
Yeah.
You know?
There's intelligence at work here. And when people are sort of more consciously playing this game, there's a special kind of help available. And it's based on your desire and your sincerity. I've gotten every single thing that I ever asked Ma for. Every single thing. Except for one. Yet to be delivered. Which is to have a house where my teaching space can be. I did ask Ma before we rented this place, should I hold out until we find this mythical house where I'm going to be able to teach? And I got a resounding no. It was like, stop pushing this particular scenario. Give up your attachment to this and just go get a commercial space. And don't move out of your tiny little apartment either. But that's part of where you demonstrate sincerity too. You give up the pursuit of something that you really want, and you just follow along with what you're being told to do. That's how you get more help. If you don't follow along and you don't do what you're asked to do, what happens? You get easier and easier and easier asks. And then what happens? Everything just slows down. Like Ma would say when she was traveling around meeting these tens of thousands of people she met. She always encouraged people to do sadhana, to do seated practice. But she knew it was a game, but that was her role too, to just keep encouraging people. And if people said, well, I can't do half an hour practice a day, she would say, do 10 minutes a day. And then she'd say, no, I can't do 10 minutes of seated practice a day. She'd say, just think of me once a day. She would just keep lowering the bar. Trying to find a place where they would agree to do what she asked them to do. But what happens if you just think of her once a day? Well, it could be absolutely life-changing, but for someone who won't do 10 minutes of seated practice a day, probably not, right? So it's useful, but it's probably going to slow everything down radically for that person. I always felt that was a great expression of mercy, because in the beginning, when I was first teaching, and maybe not so much in the beginning, I would tell people the minimum amount of practice is an hour a day if you want close guidance from me. And some people would say, oh, I can't do that. I'd be like, you know. And then I read about Ma saying, well, what about 10 minutes? Well, what about just thinking of me now and then? And I was like, okay, I've been schooled. I have to be more generous. Because what she did was very, very generous.
Going back to what you said, if we are sincere and depending on our desire, help will be provided. My level of desire, I feel I have no control. It's not always the same. How can I access more help if my sincerity is, or my desire is not always the same? I feel I have no control over that.
Well, one of the things you need to learn is how little control you have. You'll have much more control if you stop thinking you have control. Everybody's desire changes over time. My level of desire isn't the same every single day, but you can still have a level of commitment and sincerity that is based on your desire, even if you are feeling resistance. Don't mistake resistance for lack of desire. Resistance is when we are trying to change something and it meets up with the old energy trying to go in its old direction, and there's sort of a battle happening. So resistance only happens when things are changing. It's not a symptom of lack of desire. It's a symptom of the fruits of your desire and your discipline. There's other situations though where we get into just a feeling of blah or stagnation. And there's nobody on earth that doesn't feel that sometimes. And that can be for many, many different reasons. Sometimes we just have a constitution that tends in that direction. Sometimes we just get tired because of things that are going on in our lives. Sometimes we might feel overwhelmed by what's happening in the world, and that causes a kind of stagnation. There's all kinds of things going on. So learning a naturopathic tradition like Ayurveda or Chinese medicine or something, learning how to take care of your body and make adjustments when you're feeling things like sluggish and stagnant, or being willing to just rest when you need to rest, catch up on your sleep or whatever needs to happen, or knowing when you need to go to a healthcare practitioner and get help. You're never going to be in the same condition every day, though. That is not possible at all. So just take that off the table. And one of the ways we show our desire and sincerity, though, is by continuing to practice through those times when it feels dry or boring or stuck. And when we do that, at some point, things really open up a lot more. That's been my experience. When you put in that commitment, that is based on desire too. It's just that we're not able to feel it as strongly in those moments, right? If we didn't have desire, we wouldn't bother with discipline or commitment in our sadhana. So you just keep going. That's really the point. And you're going to have days when it feels really hard and other days when you're flying and everything in between. But learn how to take care of yourself, and then just let yourself be okay with just natural ups and downs, ebbs and flows.
You said something about how being overwhelmed by world events can lead to stagnation. So maybe we could talk a little bit more about that.
Well, because if we feel overwhelmed, we tend to shut down. And then we tend to slow down on purpose. And then we can get stagnant. If that goes on for too long. I mean, we've just been in an onslaught for years of experiencing the cruelty of people towards each other. It didn't just start with October 7th, that's for sure. Our planet's being harmed, our government's in a shambles, everything that's supposed to take care of us is in a shambles. There's just this lack of care, and it's cruel. So to just be confronted with that day in, day out for years on end, decades maybe. Some people are just going to shut down, or we're going to shut down at times. Maybe not all the time, but sometimes. And it's good to rest. But if we shut down, then we can get more into animal realm kind of stagnation. Or that could look like binge watching or whatever, doom scrolling. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jayakula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.